What's up, everybody? Welcome to the SSB Podcast, where we are determined to transform lives and create a holistic, God-centered lifestyle in spirit,
soul,
and
body.
We're so excited for this podcast. First off, I just want to say we're excited and happy for the fact that you're just even listening to this. We thank you for tuning into this, whether this is your first podcast that you're ever listening to on our end, or if this is I believe it's the 7th episode, right? We're 7 episodes in, and we are so happy that we're doing this, and it's been a really fun time. And so I'm just glad that you guys are on this journey. We're glad you're on this journey. And so I'm really excited about this specific podcast. We have a pretty cool topic that we all have a lot of experience in. Specifically, Dan. Dan has a lot of experience in this.
Too much experience.
Do not do that to the people. Full disclosure.
You can't just start the pod with...
We're going to start off attacking me, Jesse. Okay.
The topic is drinking.
Put your drinks in there.
It's drinking alcohol in specific.
Clarification, this is not.
This looks like Everclear. This looks like basically vodka. No, there's no vodka in this. There's no Everclear. Everclear is like 180 proof or something. Don't ask me why I know this.
Let's be super clear. This is water, folks.
Water. H2O.
This is H2O.
Water.
H2O. Although it wouldn't be bad to have just like a couple things of wine here, right?
Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Yes,
let's talk about it. So, I think
loosened up.
Get you a little relaxed. No, but I'm really excited about this just because this is something that I believe the church talks about a lot, and there's people with different opinions, different things, and there's things that are said in the Bible, right? And we all kind of have our different experiences. We have our different agreements and disagreements. So I think this is a pretty cool topic we can talk about. What do you think, Dan? What do you think, Elijah?
Yeah, so Jesse, there are a lot of biblical references
that
talk about alcohol. And as a Christian, right, like where do you lie in those boundaries, right? So it's going to be interesting to talk about it. There are many different scriptures that can get you a little confused. So we're going to share a little bit of our personal perspectives, our
for
experiences,
sure,
and get a better, clearer understandings of it.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think, as in the beginning, Dan, do you have a confession?
Stop.
Do you have a confession? Dan,
I promise, Dan. We're kind of portraying Dan to be like an alcoholic. He's not.
No, he's
recovering.
Holy.
No, I'm kidding. He's not recovering.
No, I think, on a serious note, though, Dan is a great guy.
Appreciate that.
He's a great guy. But I think this topic, the reason we really wanted to discuss it is because, especially in the Christian world, it's almost like hit or miss. Like some people like, hey, I don't care. I'm going to take my bottle and I'm going to have fun in moderation. Others is cold turkey. I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to look at it. If I look at it, I'm going to throw it out the door. Yeah. So I think we're just going to discuss, have a great conversations and, what does the Bible say? But also like cultural norms, like what is, because in one culture it might be acceptable and maybe like you almost have to do it. In other cultures it's completely different. So maybe let's just start with like a biblical perspective. Like, hey, what are maybe a verse or two that talk about that, and then kind of dive deep into that.
Right, and actually, we can kind of get into that, but even more so expanding on that, like there's like 3 different factors that come into talking about this. Is like the biblical side of it, and the cultural side of it, and the historical side of it too. But I think historical kind of ties into biblical a little bit too, right? And cultural, but everything's kind of tied together there. So, but I do want to kind of point out a couple verses and hear everybody's thoughts on this. So like the first one being Romans 13, chapter 13, Romans chapter 13, verse 11, 11 through 14. So I'll just read it really quickly. Okay. It says, furthermore, knowing the time, now is the moment to awake from sleep. For now our salvation is nearer than when we believed. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Therefore, let us take off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us behave properly as in the day, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in immorality and wickedness, not in strife and envy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill its lust. So immediately we can see in this verse, like, it's portraying drunkenness is in the darkness, right? Like, drunkenness.
Can't do it.
Can't do it. Can't do it. I think we can all believe. How about this? I think we can all agree the fact that drunkenness is wrong, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So essentially, I think that verse is kind of speaking on balance too, like how you are consuming alcoholism, and it references many other scriptures that we'll talk about in the Bible that talks about the communion of Jesus and sipping on wine.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
How are you using, like, day and night? Like, are you using under influence of celebration just because, you know, it's your birthday?
Yeah.
And you want to just celebrate and get drunk, or are you on tropical islands and you want to just get away from the world and consume a whole bunch of alcohol? But it's referring to me. I see it as balance. Like, you know, what is the purpose and intent behind why you are consuming alcohol?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to point out that we are not like experts on any topic. We're learning, we're growing, but all three of us do have I think in a way a different perspective on it, which we'll share about.
Yeah.
And I think what makes it more difficult, if you're newer to the faith and you're like, you just picked up the Bible, you read that verse, and then there's another verse saying that it's, which Jesse, maybe you want to read that. So just kind of show the two.
Ecclesiastes 9:7 literally basically says, like, drink your wine with gladness. I'm not going to go into it, but Ecclesiastes is one of the books of wisdom. It's, you know, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. See, this is why we're not experts. But it literally says, drink your wine with gladness. There's also other parts where Jesus turns water into wine. There's parts where it even says with Jesus, when he talked about John, he didn't drink wine or didn't give in to these things, and they were calling him a demon like the Pharisees. But now the Son of Man comes along, and they're saying that he drinks, and they're saying that he's a drunkard, and what was the other thing? Glutton. Drunkard and a glutton. So it's like, first off, did Jesus drink?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, if you turn water into wine, you know, again, we don't know. We don't have a video from back in the day, but I think it's important. What is the motive behind it? Like, for me,
Right.
like, I just don't drink. It's not, I don't look
So
at
you're a cold turkey guy.
I'm
right?
cold turkey.
So full disclosure, Elijah's a cold turkey guy.
So
right?
Option one.
So that's option one.
This is option one right here.
You know, some people teeter the lines.
Yeah.
You know, I think that it is okay to have a glass of wine with your dinner, right? You want to wash it down, right? It's, you know, it's relaxing, you know, or you're winding down, right? You know, I think it's important to understand the historical context, right? Not only biblically, but personally.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because alcoholics are real, right? And if I'm an individual, and I would be fully disclosed with me and where I stand on
He's an
alcohol.
alcoholic.
So we're going to crush that D right now. I am a cold turkey guy for the most part.
Okay.
But,
but
I will say,
bro.
He's like,
I can be a social drinker at times. It has to be a legitimate occasion, a celebration, right? For me to just get out. And that's out of my comfort zone, honestly, because I've been to college parties. I've been to many different parties, different celebrations, and I've been the only one not drinking. I've been comfortable with that. So going back to your personal historical context, right?
Yeah.
Who was an alcoholic in your family?
Yeah.
Right? Because generational curses are real.
Absolutely.
Right? And if I know that my father was an alcoholic, my father's father was an alcoholic, his father was an alcoholic, right? I probably want to stay away from it and be cognizant of what I consume and where I am doing it at. Because you can put yourself in danger to just fall right back in line, right, with the generational curse. And that's real.
100%. 100%. I think that, and I want to let Elijah actually talk about this because he kind of has that somewhat of like that experience on his side. My dad does too, but like yours is like on point, you know, like the cold turkey part of it.
Yeah.
But like even just like quickly preferencing it, like everybody has their own specific like preferences and stuff like that. But even when it comes to the generational stuff, that's no joke. I mean, I actually talked to somebody about this, like, are generational curses like legit, or are they like, you know, are they just kind of like a figment of our imagination? And like kind of the result of that conversation was like, even if the idea of generational curses wasn't like a real thing, your entire family has done that beforehand, so it's easier for you to get into it, irregardless if you want to call it a curse or not. Yeah. And so, like on your end, you know, like you kind of had somewhat of that situation in your family, right?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to it's talking about environments. Like for example, who you surround yourself with, that's who you become. But I think that's on a spiritual level too. Yeah, it's not just like physically, but I think looking at the generations, like if your grandfather was an athlete, your father was an athlete, there's a high chance you're probably going to be an athlete. And it's not,
or you're going to be influenced to become an athlete.
That's the key. It's your choice,
right?
But influence.
And I think that's where the generational curse could lie, right? Yeah. You can use it. So the curse obviously is the negative side of things, right? Like if I knew that my dad was an alcoholic and so forth, right? It's a family ties thing. Then I am going to be more cognizant in my approach, right? So like, what does that look like? You know, if I'm around an environment where there's many different alcohol options, right? And I get too many drinks, a little bit too much drinks, right? Like I can either fall into that sphere of continuously drinking at these occasions, or I can have a little bit of self-control, right? And say, maybe next time I'm not going to drink because I know what this can lead to, right? So that's the balance, right? Like, you also obviously want to be cognizant of your consumption in general when you're partaking in alcoholism, right? But you want to be cognizant of when you decide to do it and what is it actually for and what purpose does it serve.
Yeah. And too much of anything is never good.
Right. Yeah.
We have to clarify. You can sin with a pizza. you know, like it's, and I think.
What do you mean by that?
What do you mean by that? What I'm saying is, like kind of talked about in that verse, right? Drunkenness and gluttony.
Yeah.
And so, but you know, we're going to focus on more of the drinking side. But for me, my personal, the reason I'm a cold turkey is it's a choice. And it's not to say that I don't have self-control. I just understand the power of consequences behind things. Yeah. Like I look at it from this perspective. Does this thing enhance, make me better, and motivate me to become the best version of myself? For me. Absolutely. Again, I can't speak for anyone, but for me, I'm thinking, will this make me a better person? And to me, I don't see, because too many times you see stories of people, those viral videos, someone is drunk or someone is driving and drinking, and someone, I'm like, I am one step closer to that. It's like, imagine if I'm 20 feet from the cliff, and every time you drink, you take a step closer to the cliff, until you get right there on the edge. So even though I didn't fall, I am very close. That's the way I see it. So to add to that, kind of actually going against it, because
I was going to ask before I get my point. Jesse, I want you to give us your first off, experience or your preference.
I'm not an alcoholic.
He's not an alcoholic, folks.
I'm kind of on the same, somewhat of the same vibe, but like I do want to point out, you know, you saying like, what does it benefit you, right? So whenever we're talking about like kind of trying to put two and two together, let's just say I'm basically, it's similar to like sex. Okay. All right. So sex in the context of marriage is amazing. Right. It's awesome. Okay. I don't know anything about it personally because I, am not married.
Yeah. He's not married. There we go. Boom.
I'm not married. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm
there we go.
Eunuch. No, I'm kidding.
Clear that up. Yeah.
Definitely not a eunuch. I will be, my goal is to get married. But like, let's just put, those two examples together, because
I like
there is good when it comes to wine, because it's meant for celebratory purposes. And like, when you look at the context of Jesus and the Jewish context as well, there's a lot of wine involved in that, right? But when you talk about wine and then you talk about like other hard alcohols and other things that are like, they're basically meant to get you drunk. Like then there's a line, because once you have sex outside of marriage is when you have stepped a boundary, and it's a very difficult line to like keep in line, I guess, like to be on the other side and not to just want to go on the opposite side, right? So like that's kind of what drinking is like, there's moderation, there's things that you can do that like even in scripture, like they use that for biblical purposes. But then, you can definitely get drunk and use it outside of what its purpose really is.
And I think that's why the environment is so important. The environment is
100%.
important because I think just alcohol in general, like we know what alcohol does. Right?
It does a lot.
Makes you happy.
It's a brain thing that takes control over your mind once alcohol consumes and gets into your system, right? So for people like myself, right, I'm a control freak. Like when it comes to myself, right? I know being under the influence of alcohol, right? Like you can lose a little bit of control.
Yeah.
And that's why the balance is important. And that's why understanding where you're at and why you're consuming that is even more important.
Yeah.
Right? Because no one wants to get drunk, right?
Right. And I think for me, again, I only can reference myself because it's my life. The reason I made that choice is not because to please anybody, is not to even please my parents. It's just at this time in my life, I just want to be better in other ways. Like, for example, if we're going now and celebrating, hey, we just launched this podcast or just started this business, I think you can celebrate other ways, not just drinking. I think drinking does resemble, like, hey, celebratory, and you have a good time.
Certainly.
Yeah, but again, context and environment does matter. And, I do, for me, my family has a history of relatives and, my father, before he was saved at age 28, he had, struggled with alcohol and a lot of different things. And so I definitely know that, that generational curse is broken. But at the same time, I don't even want to give an inch to something that could spiral into the effect. Because I'm in the same way. Like, I like to dominate. I like to make sure that if I'm going to do it, it's my way. Right. And so I was like, I do have that more addictive personality where it's like, if I do it, I'm going to do it 110%. So I'll rather, like, you know what? Because knowing that.
And I think self-conscious, too. Like being aware of your surroundings, being aware of your thoughts, having control over your thoughts. Yeah. Right? There's a certain level of just looseness, right? Yeah. When you are under the influence of alcohol. So, there's a certain level of relaxation that can be good, but where are you at when you're feeling that relaxed? And so that's why that's so important too. And for me, I think it takes a lot of leadership too, because as a leader, you make the decision. The social influence is to, as a college, we've all been college students, we've all graduated from college, and you guys have been in environments and parties where a lot of people are doing the pregame joint, right? We do the pregame joint, and then we go out and we do some more drinking, and then so it's just understanding that if this is who you are, and I'm a cold turkey guy, so and a lot of those cases, I would just, hey, you want to drink? No, I'm good. I'm not drinking. Yeah. Right? I could be out with my boys, and I'll be the only one that's not drinking, and that's okay, right? But I take ownership of that because I walk in my own purpose. I'm a leader, so I accept it, right?
And let's talk a little bit about okay, how do you navigate in a situation? Well, let's say you are the cold turkey, or even flipped,
right?
In an environment as a Christian, because I feel like a lot of people that are on one side or the other. So Jesse, I want you to talk about it. There's a verse that talks about that great of how do you navigate in a situation where you're in an environment where your beliefs is like, I'm not drinking, everyone else is. How do you navigate that graciously where you're not coming off like, oh, I'm the cool guy. Look at you. I'm not.
Or you're too good.
You're too good for us, and then vice versa. Let's talk about that a little bit too.
I don't want to talk about it.
That's fine. He's been butthurt before.
It's a very touchy topic.
Yeah, super touchy topic.
Well, I think before you go though, the cool thing about this is that we're all Christians, and we provide a different perspective on what the consumption of alcohol.
Jesse.
I'm sorry.
The consumption of consuming alcohol, the assumption of consuming alcohol.
Yeah.
What's too much? What's okay? What's not okay?
Yeah. Well, first off, we are all Christians. If you haven't noticed by now, we love the Lord. We love Jesus.
Call
okay.
God. Hey. Call God. There we go. Call God.
Call God.
Baby.
There's so much to talk about in this topic because we kind of tapped into this a little bit, but even the emotional side of it, what are you feeling, when you want to take a drink, or what are your motives? Because a lot of people, and I catch myself thinking about this, I thought about this even in a specific season of my life, I was stressed and I had a long day at work, or there was a lot happening in my life. and I realized like, I was like, man, a drink would help, you know? And I'm like, why am I thinking like that?
That's
You know?
See, that's
That's
the
going
teetering
across the
Hey,
line.
That's teetering the lines of abuse.
Exactly.
Right? So like the purpose of consuming alcohol is
Like
for
why?
the purpose
You know?
of
Yeah.
communion, right? Like
You
they're
have to-
celebratory, right? But if
You
I
have to
would-
understand your why. Like if you're coming back home and you're like, I just need some wine to like wind down.
Right.
Like
No pun
no pun
intended.
and honestly, and this is like shifting gears a little bit, but like
Yeah.
it's because it's prevalent to what we're talking about. But just like marijuana, like a lot of people
Yeah.
can use it for medical purposes, and a lot of people can use it because they want to chill out and
just
relax,
wanna have a good time.
But that's abuse, though.
Yeah.
like because
That's a
you're not.
whole nother topic.
It is, but
That's a whole
it,
nother
but
topic.
it to me, though, Jesse, the two things that you see most though when you're out partying and you're in
It's those
environments
two.
is those two things:
Yeah.
consuming drinks and
Smoking weed, or
right?
just
Whether
like
it's with the
vaping
vape,
or whatever.
Right? Like,
look,
what's your purpose behind it?
pointing out another verse, 1 Peter 5, chapter 8, if we're talking about like not just drinking, but overall like having self-control,
Yeah.
the verse literally says, be sober and watchful, because your adversary, the devil, walks around as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him firmly in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are experienced by your brothers and your brotherhood throughout the world. So it's like, it's basically saying be sober-minded. It's not just, you know, we're talking about the topic drinking, right? But like even to shift when it comes to marijuana, or when it comes to certain things that make you feel relaxed or like get you out of your head, like the Bible strictly says to be sober-minded, and
like-
that's including all of it, you know?
Right. It's like having your guard up against the enemy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. And like to be in a position where you're consuming alcohol, you're like, as humans, we're all tempted. Like everyone's tempted. I don't care how purified you are. You're tempted.
Exactly.
So if I let my guard down by losing control over my brain cells because of the alcohol consumption that I'm intaking, that is putting your guard down and allowing the enemy to come in and have more control over your actions, your thoughts, right? Which could lead to, you see drunk drivers, right? Like doing destructive things because of the consumption of alcohol. So I think it's just everything that we're talking about is to ensure the balance of it. Although I think that you can perfectly be a Christian and have a drink,
Yeah.
right? But where are you at having that drink?
Yeah.
And who are you with, and what's the purpose of that? you
Yeah,
know?
because there's cultural things too.
Yeah.
Like, bro,
Yeah.
there's a lot of places where just drinking is entirely
Acceptable.
normal and they don't abuse it. You know,
Yeah.
Right.
They just don't abuse it.
Right.
I know a lot of people that they drink and they don't abuse it, but I also know a lot of people that are kind of like they drink and they don't realize that they're abusing it, and they're kind of oblivious to it. You know,
Yeah.
and so like being sober minded, I think like that kind of summarizes it. But
Let me ask this to Elijah, because
What did I do?
because
Yeah.
you're a cold turkey guy, so I want to get your perspective.
Yeah, please.
I've dealt with experiences where I've been in situations where there's been peers and friends and environments where everyone's drinking. Have you been in situations where you've been the only person, like a bystander? Essentially,
Yes,
like you're the
I
only
put-
one that's not drinking.
Yeah, not like every day.
Okay, yeah, but you've been. Okay.
But I've been in situations where, I was the only one. And this is the way I approached it. I didn't look at them like I'm better than them.
Yeah.
I just like, hey, like, what's their story? And it's interesting when if you ever talk to a drunk person,
Yeah.
they speak their mind.
Yeah, yeah,
They're
yeah.
very
Yeah.
unfiltered.
100%.
They say how it is. And in that environment, I had incredible conversations with them.
Okay.
And they knew, like, hey, I'm not drinking. I explained to them why. And we just had a great conversation. Do I think it's wise to put myself in that situation every single time? No. Because the way the devil works is if you do something and nothing happens, what's going to be? You're like, I can do it again. Nothing happens. I can do it again.
Yeah.
And then it becomes to the point where you are not sober.
Yeah.
As Peter.
yeah,
And then at a moment,
Yeah.
and then from there, that's where the temptation, falling into temptation, comes
Yeah.
into play. So I think for me, like, I've been occasionally in those environments where I'm the only one, and I just smiled and waved. And
Yeah, it's so important. It's so important to know thyself,
yeah.
so that you're not tempted,
Dude.
and controlled by the environment. If
That
you're
is so true.
If you're controlled by the environment, then
Yeah.
you're gonna fall into temptation.
Yeah,
every time.
easy.
Another thing to point out is your physical tolerance. Because there are some people, one drink of anything is
one
all
little
it takes, man.
Yeah.
All it takes. Okay. And so like there's definitely, parameters to what you just said, like know thyself, because like even tackling on to what you were asking him, like me personally, dude, like I've been a designated driver for so many times, bro, like so many times. The DD, like through so many situations, man. And it's like not even, it's funny because the purpose is like a lot of them don't go out to necessarily get drunk, but in the end it's like, boom, they get drunk and like I'm the one driving them home. And like I've been in those situations like a lot at this point. And I chose not to, I chose not to because there's like a benefit to it, like while being sober minded around these people. Like I remember every conversation I had with you and you didn't.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just observe too.
Yeah.
Like
observance.
What's going on? How is this affecting people? I think, but sometimes we can feel a level of being left out if we're the only one. So that's why I say it's important to know thyself so that you can be comfortable, right? Even in an environment, an atmosphere where you're the only one that's not drinking and still have a good time, right? So I think that's important to understand and realize.
Just make sure you represent Christ in the best possible way. Again, that's the way I see it, is if I see you, either you're drinking or even in moderation, that you reflect Christ. That's what really matters.
Yeah, man. Good stuff. That was a good conversation. I think we can all come to agreement that drinking is acceptable and that it's okay to get drunk. So I'm kidding, guys. No, there's moderation. And I think like wrapping all of this up, like we all kind of have that same ideology that at the end of the day, like we want to be able to represent Christ. And so that's our goal, is to represent Christ wherever we go. And how is that shown? So this is an awesome podcast. I thank
subscribe.
You guys. Yes, I thank you guys for tuning in. We thank you. Keep tuning in. Keep subscribing, liking. If you don't like this or you have any feedback, anything you want us to talk about, throw it in the chat, in the comment, and we'll get back to you and try to make a podcast about it, make an episode. So love you guys. Stay tuned. SSB out.